even if a politician goes out there and sticks to economic issues, you have to address the social issues in a way that people can feel comfortable with you. You can't just ignore them. A lot of politicians
Exactly.
out there think you can just go out there and not talk about whatever issue, don't talk about trans women in sports, and you can run an economic populist campaign in like a conservative adjacent state or a moderate state and you'll win. No, you have to address the social issues. Welcome, everyone. Today we're here with Scotty Moore from Searchlight. Scotty, you want to introduce yourself real quick? Tell our viewers what Searchlight is. I think if you've been on Twitter the last couple of weeks, you probably know what Searchlight is. So,
Yeah.
Scotty, take it away.
Hello, my name is Scotty Moore. I am a policy associate at Searchlight. I basically help out with a lot of the research, the writing, the editing of all of the policy work that ends up going out. Searchlight is a organization that is dedicated to challenging a lot of the policy orthodoxies that we have all probably contributed to or consumed, in recent years. And we're trying to create a information ecosystem that kind of like counteracts a lot of the misinformation that comes from liberal organizations.
Yeah. And Scotty, if you want to just follow up question real quick, what is some of that liberal misinformation that you're talking about? Where does that come from? And why do you think it is so big in liberal politics and democratic politics? Why do you think those groups have such a big say?
So I think a lot of it does come down to both messaging and kind of the information that they give to a lot of these politicians. I think probably the most apparent being climate change, and you can see that in our polling as well. Is climate a crisis? You have a portion of voters that are like, yes, but still they don't prioritize any of that. But you will still have climate groups who are coming to these politicians and be like, we have climate voters, and these are the people who are deciding the elections and the issues that they broadly just like don't exist, and we're not able to necessarily find any numbers. It's not that, Americans don't care, it's just they don't prioritize it. So there definitely are voters who care about climate. There are not climate voters. So I think that that is like probably like the best example I have for that.
It seems to be like almost you guys are kind of pushing to have more of a recognition of trade-offs, and like that these voters, even though they may be generally like pro fighting climate change, when trade-offs start to come into the equation and they're paying more in their energy bills and for gas prices, like that those things end up being unpopular. How do you feel like Democrats are approaching 2028 and going forward in response to kind of the purity test last time around? Do you think that obviously you guys are working to kind of make sure we learn our lessons, but do you feel like broadly the Democratic Party is at a place where they understand that locking people into those positions in primaries was something that hurt our candidates in general elections? Is that something they're coming to recognize as a party, do you think?
Probably slowly. I think that their like ideology has kind of been a shift away from any of like the social issues and more just, driving at affordability. And I'm economic issues first. I think it's great. And I think that's a really great way to go about it. I don't think that a lot of politicians are necessarily at a point where they are less fervent about their like more liberal social beliefs. But, hopefully that's kind of like soon to come. I mean, we've seen some, I guess, some rupture in that, especially on the climate change front. You had shots go to Climate Week and be like, we should stop messaging it as climate is a crisis because it's just like turning off voters entirely. But yeah, I think it's a reckoning that is coming.
Kind of along the lines of that reckoning, obviously, Searchlight was created sort of in the aftermath of 2024. Your boss, Adam Gentleson, is it
Gentleson, yeah.
Gentleson? I was reading an op-ed that he wrote right after the election. I'm just going to read a quote because I think it's important and kind of clarifies your guys' thought process of the current landscape. He said, achieving a supermajority means declaring independence from liberal and progressive interest groups that prevent Democrats from thinking clearly about how to win. Collectively, these groups impose the rigid mores and vocabulary of college-educated elites, placing a hard ceiling on Democrats' appeal and fatally wounding them in places they need to win, not just to take back the White House, but have a prayer in the Senate. Obviously, I think most people can sort of recognize that the cancel culture environment of the last 5 or 6 years has been not to the benefit of Democrats and has
Mhm.
really put a dampener on discourse. But I guess sort of just a philosophical question. What would Searchlight do, and what are you guys currently doing to make sure that it's not just shifting from one paradigm of messaging to another versus sort of eliminating that bias, that policing of messaging that has existed?
I think that this is very like anti-policing and messaging. It's kind of pushing back and being like these rigid constructs that you are putting on politicians is making our policy goals just lose entirely. So I think it is less saying these are the messaging points that you need to be hitting. It is saying that we should allow for a varying of messaging points, no matter like where they come from. Um, I think it is a it is a far more like classical liberal approach to it.
To play devil's advocate a little bit, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not super familiar with Searchlight, hence why we're having you on here so we can all
Yeah.
learn more about Searchlight, is that it's taking, and you kind of alluded to this, taking the messaging of the Democratic Party away from sort of like climate change and LGBTQ issues to a certain extent, still having them as part of the platform, but not the main focus, and instead focusing on affordability, on economic issues. Is that not, in some sense, like a playbook, a like you're putting up the guardrails at the bowling alley and saying, hey, these things are important on the outside of the bowling alley, but on the inside of the lane, we got to focus on economic issues. Is that
Not
not, in some
necess
sense, putting up
I
guardrails?
I I wouldn't necessarily say it's putting up guardrails, but it is saying that these groups have kind of like infected the way that we talk about these issues to a point that they are damaging people who may be in battleground seats. So it's being like these guardrails that have been set up do not help us win those seats. Therefore, they need to be taken down in those cases.
Right, right. So you're just correcting back to some sort of middle, which involves destruction of some sort of existing social order and going back to something that is like, well, the social order that
Well,
exists
yeah,
right now with cancel culture, and just saying, hey,
yeah,
let's not do that, is
yeah,
what I mean.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting just because I feel like that has not been part of the discourse on either side recently, especially with Trump really
yeah, for sure.
policing messaging, the indictment of James Comey, really going after his enemies, and then cancel culture kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, so you guys are kind of pushing for the big tent approach, and I think I've seen some people on the left kind of push back against some of the people who had been arguing against these purity tests, saying that it was hypocritical because, for example, like a Zoran uh, Mondani, they didn't endorse him, or they were arguing that like he can't be considered a true Democrat, but that if we're doing a true big tent approach, that's fine. So how do you handle like being open to all Democrats who are running their own specific races in the area they're in and running it accordingly, but also not wanting to have candidates on a national level who kind of by association infect these swing state candidates with their unpopular positions or framing of things? Like, how do you balance being open to all in the Democratic Party while also like recognizing that nationally figures can kind of, even if someone's running in a battleground state and they're running a very like disciplined campaign, they can kind of be caught up in whatever people are saying about a popular national Democrat. So how do you kind of balance those two things?
I would say that candidates should probably feel a bit more comfortable distancing themselves from individuals that they don't necessarily seem aligned with generally, and I think that's fine. I don't think it's to be like this person cannot be in our party. I don't think that's probably the approach, and I think that's been often the approach with Mamdani. if candidates like Mamdani are willing to share the same party, like people with like, I think that that is a beautiful thing, and I think that that is generally where the Democrats should be heading.
I like that. So just leaving room for them to kind of distinguish themselves, but
Exactly.
not not kicking the
Exactly.
person out of the party for their position. I like that.
Yeah. I just also want to just quickly say, I think what Scotty is alluding to, what I would agree with is like politicians are going to run different campaigns in different areas, and that might be like an economic. I argue that you're representing a poor district, run on an economic populist message. That's probably going to go a long way. But just because Memdani is doing what he's doing in New York City doesn't mean like John Ossoff can do the same in Georgia. So allowing candidates that giving them that like lead room, giving them that like leg room to kind of run their own races, talk about issues that their constituents care about, and break away from the Democratic mainstream on a couple of these social issues. I don't think we should be so frantic about that. And I've seen like discourse online of calling, like, I don't know if you guys saw Graham Plattner's tweet about October 7th. He's like, hey, what happened on October 7th? Horrible. We should never let that happen again. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And he's also been very pro Palestine. And a lot of people in the comment section were like, oh my God, how dare you? How dare you acknowledge this? How dare you acknowledge October 7th? Call Hamas a terrorist organization, whatever it is, right? And I'm like, dude, like, what are you saying? This is like the most stupid, advice you could give him on messaging, like just being so frantic. And this is like one issue I'm talking about. There's so many issues across the board where, let's say, a politician running in Montana is like, yeah, I don't know how I feel about, trans women in sports, at least in the high college level. I don't know if I'm too comfortable with that. Okay, automatically you're a bigot. Automatically you're X, Y, and Z, kind of alluding to what Dylan said about cancel culture. It's like, hey, like let's kind of stay away from that a little bit. Let candidates run their own races. Let them find what works in their district and what they really believe in, because voters can see through the bullshit. So that's always been my mentality. It's like, let's not quickly just jump and say that you're a bigot. I know I sent Scotty a poll in Virginia that showed half of Democrats were actually against trans women in women's sports. However you feel about the issue, are half of those Democrats bigots? Like that's an honest question to ask. Because if everyone's a bigot who opposes it, are half of Democrats bigots?
Mhm.
That's kind of something I've pondered upon, Scotty. I don't know how you've kind of taken on those issues where there is a lot of
Yeah.
emotion amongst
I
a more smaller group of people, but
especially on the social views aspect, I think that something that we continue to see in polling is that Americans do have pretty like nuanced views on a lot
yes.
of these social issues, and I don't think that we allow them to do that, at least like electorally, when we're having like a lot of the discourse, especially on the left. Um, but Americans want people who commit crimes to be put in jail. They think mass incarceration is bad. They believe people deserve second chances. They want stronger borders. They support border patrol, but they also do not want to see, the cruelty that we see on, a daily basis nowadays. They have these pretty like nuanced views on these social issues. We should allow candidates who also have these nuanced views be not only in the party but running as candidates.
What does your like sort of opposition to the cancel culture left, how does that play out in reality? What are you guys specifically doing that allows for broader speech? Is it just supporting candidates who might not have completely ideology based views, or is it promoting issues in different ways? Like, how are you guys going about this?
I think it's kind of twofold. It's not only like making policy and trying to meet people where they are at on a lot of these issues, but it's also giving polling that is nonpartisan, independent. There's no sort of preconceived notion that we're trying to reach like a lot of liberal groups are. And I think it's trying to create that information ecosystem that creates like a permission structure for candidates to be willing to take these more heterodox approaches.
So there's like a guiding north star, and correct me if I'm wrong in this characterization, but there's like some sort of direction that you're going towards versus other groups might have a outcome and then they backfill the steps to get there, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I think,
Exactly.
Scotty, real quick, not to interrupt, I think this is a perfect example. Just want to show our viewers, this is polling that Searchlight had released recently. Just want to go through them, kind of what you're talking about. If you want to break them down, the first one the question was which party focuses more on each issue. You could see a lot more red here. Kind of explain what this means and why we got to this point, if you can.
Sorry. Yeah.
You're good.
I think it is kind of twofold. It's not only where the party has created kind of an activist ecosystem where they like push a lot of these issues. So that's kind of at the forefront of a lot of Americans' mind. But also there is kind of like a media structure to that as well that plays into it. So I kind of think that shapes where we're at ideologically, or where at least Americans see where our focus is. And at least like speaking to a lot of these issues, much of the issues besides healthcare were like top of mind for most American voters. It really was like things like immigration, crime, taxes, and the economy is up there. And those were where most voters were at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this reminds me of Sarah McBride's interview with Ezra Klein. She made a point that I've thought about a lot after the election, which was that even on issues that the polling is favorable to Democrats on specific issues, things like abortion, often some aspects of trans healthcare, even people are anti-discrimination in the workplace, things like that, where Democrats do have the win on the merits of the issue with the public, that even if we win on that issue polling wise, talking about it at the expense of talking about other issues that people rank higher created this perception that Democrats care more about these issues that aren't really relevant to your lives. And I believe she was referencing a similar poll to this one, where it also asked voters to rank their top 5 issues in importance. And I think and then what they ranked the top 5 for each party. And I think the Republican one matched by like 4 out of 5, and the Democrats maybe only had 1 or perhaps 2 that matched. And so I think just how much you talk about each issue, regardless of like whether you technically win on the issue on the merits, I think is pretty relevant to like why this chart itself is a problem.
Being right on the issue on the merits does not matter if you don't win elections. Just flat out. I think that is part of the problem with a lot of the like back to the liberal orthodoxy point. Sure, you may entirely be right. It's probably like morally coherent. It's probably a really great policy scape. Means absolutely nothing if you're not able to message and win on it. It means nothing. So I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of dive into the numbers here, and you can kind of see the stark contrast. I mean, Republicans taking away with immigration, crime, foreign policy, taxes, the economy, housing. That's a good sign that Democrats.
Woo!
They think Democrats focus more on housing. I think
That surprised
recently
me.
But
that's good.
I
And
especially
yeah,
but I think back to Ben's point is like if you're not talking about it, if Dems or just really any political party is completely just running away from the issue, you are leaving the other opposition, the time to talk about this. And that's definitely what happened with the issue of immigration.
Which party focuses more on each issue? Focuses is doing a lot of work there. What does focuses mean in this specific context?
At least my understanding of the question, it's not necessarily on like policy and merits of like who you disagree with, but like who do you think is talking the most about the issue?
Okay.
So I think that is part of it. Yeah, it's not like who do you agree with? So
yeah. Is it like more so like
yeah.
who's louder about it? Who do you hear more
It's
from?
What you
it's like
prioritize.
who do you which party do you think cares about this issue the most? Basically.
Right. Yeah, it's also interesting, kind of what Ben was saying earlier was like how the more nuanced you get on a position, the less support you tend to get on a lot of these issues. And I think that is something also that Democrats struggle with a lot. Like Elizabeth Warren with her 101 plans about random issues.
Big structural change. Big.
Yeah. And it's like the polling for Medicare for All. Whenever you ask people, do you want free healthcare? They're like, yeah, it's like 70% or whatever it is. But the more nuanced you get about specifics, about how their taxes will change, about how their coverage will change, they might not be able to go to the same doctor that they were going to go to before. It becomes then its support is drastically reduced.
Yeah.
Trade-offs.
So the slogans are great. The slogans, you can get universal support on. I mean, that's probably why they push them. But like, the more nuance you get into the conversation, people just get turned off.
I think that's true for both sides, which is why you got
For
the
sure.
muzzle velocity
Yeah.
sort of
For sure.
doctrine
It's
for the
the,
Trump administration.
you know, you tell Americans, to put it on the right side, secure the border, and everyone's like, yes, totally, get it. You can
Right.
get pretty
Right.
good, solid, you know, approval of that. But you know, people see what the reality of that policy looks like, and now they're not interested in it anymore.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what's important is that Americans, like you said, they don't have like Americans don't line up on like fully the left or right. We kind of were talking about this in class, how a lot of Americans want to raise taxes on the rich. A lot of Americans want like a universal healthcare plan, whatever that looks like. But a lot of Americans do want to secure the border, whatever that means to them. A lot of Americans, yeah. So it's like, and so a big issue I have with a lot of the groups, they'll say, well, if you cave to the Republicans on this issue, then the median voter, like they're going to vote for the Republicans anyways. They're just going to vote for the actual Republican. They're not going to vote for the Republican light. And my whole point is that that's not how voters function. Just
That's
because
not.
they're conservative adjacent on one issue doesn't mean they're conservative on all other issues. Americans have different beliefs, different views, and sometimes we may say conflict with each other, but they don't think they do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's entirely correct.
And
I
yeah.
wonder. Oh, sorry. I wonder. Like, I think this is one. I'm very convinced by it, but I think this is a very convincing pitch to a lot of people who work in democratic politics, who follow it very closely. But what I'm wondering is, like, part of what created this whole problem is the incentive structure with the primaries, where, like, the voters themselves, rank and file Democrats in primaries, how do we kind of get them on board with something like this and get them more willing to not have their ideal candidate on every single issue in a district where we actually need to like win people who aren't registered Democrats voting in primaries? How do we kind of balance that, especially going forward as the next presidential primaries take place?
More the voters or the members?
The voters themselves, like, how do we get, I think we can definitely get like Democrats and candidates perhaps on board, but I'm just wondering, like, if there is a candidate who decides to kind of buck what we're saying and run as a strong Democrat who doesn't apologize for being a Democrat, like, I feel like that could still appeal to a lot of primary voters. So how do you kind of get the voters on board with this philosophy that ultimately winning is what the main priority should be rather than purity on every
You're talking
issue?
about primary voters, getting
Yeah,
primary voters on
primary
board to
Democratic
accommodate
primary
to a
voters.
general election.
I mean, inherently, I would say that like the pragmatism of Democratic voters probably helps that a lot. I mean, Democratic primary voters are already pretty pragmatic. I mean, you can kind of see that in a lot of these tough seats, they often reject whatever may be seen as like an ideological extreme candidate who would likely lose. So I think that definitely feeds into that. But I think a lot of it is raising the salience of this polling and being like, you know, this may be how we feel, but also your neighbors just don't agree with you. And
Yes.
how do we get your neighbors on board for
Yeah.
everything? And I think that is something that you know, 2028 candidate that is looking to not only win the primary but go on to win the general needs to
Yeah.
stress is that not all of our positions are necessarily going to be popular, but how do we find the ones that are popular and win on?
Yes. And I think
I love that, like, top down where one of the candidates themselves, like, if we have enough of them talking about it on the 2028 debate stage, like, making that point, I do think that that's a great way to get it to kind of seep down to the voters. Because I do think, like, in 2020, that voters were caring about, like, how did they poll against Trump in hypothetical polling. But, like, this is a little more nuanced, a little more
yeah.
inside baseball.
Yeah,
But I
That
for
think it's
that may
very
sure.
have hurt
similar.
us in the long run. And
Well, yeah, but
Well, well, yeah, um,
yeah,
yeah,
no, no one knows what the hell is gonna happen. So
no, I mean, yeah, no one really knows, but I genuinely think just like across the board, you know, you know, the party are kind of recognizing that, you know, their positions just often aren't popular in some of these more red areas. And how do you shift for that?
100 and Scotty, what I want to mention real quick and what this poll kind of shows is a lot of my family members were like Obama to Trump voters. And it was,
Many such
and
cases.
we're immigrants, like my, composed of
Hmm.
immigrants too. And it's like and it makes a lot of sense because when I would talk to them, they're like, hey, Democrats only focus on like and name the top three social issues. That's what they would say. Like Democrats only focus about trans people, they only focus about like whatever it is, blah, 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 climate change. They don't care about, like me wanting a job or me being able to
Mhm.
buy a home. Like all I hear from them is whatever social issues are out there. And that may not be true because Kamala Harris didn't even talk about them that much. But again, she did in the past. And I think the party culture is so embellished within the social issues. So even if a politician goes out there and sticks to economic issues, you have to address the social issues in a way that people can feel comfortable with you. That's what I'm saying. You can't just ignore them. A lot of politicians
Exactly.
out there think you can just go out there and not talk about whatever issue. Don't talk about trans women in sports, and you can run an economic populist campaign in like a conservative adjacent state or a moderate state, and you'll win. No, you have to address the social issues. And people are like, "Well, Mandani's doing it in New York City." Yeah, dude, that's New York fucking city. Like that's so different. So I think the other, yeah,
It looks different. I mean, it looks different not only because he's in New York City, but I mean, you know, speaking to where Mamdani was 2 years ago, is very
yes,
different to where he is now. And I don't,
defund the police.
there are a lot of positions that he has previously held that are just like not where he is at anymore. And I don't think there's an issue with that. I think Mamdani 2 years ago probably would have fired the police commissioner immediately. And it doesn't necessarily seem like he is tied to that view, at least not very open or publicly. Especially on a lot of the crime issues the positions he had previously held, are not where he's at now. And I think that's, that's part of why Mamdani works, and has that reaching, but he's also running against Cuomo. And that's also part of it too.
100%.
Well, and I
Yep.
think it's important to note too, it's not like he just avoided talking about defunding the police or avoided talking about these things the second
Exactly.
time around. He explicitly, I think, apologized for like calling the
And took it back.
NYPD, yeah, like
Racist. Yeah.
inherently racist, sexist, homophobic. Queer
Yeah.
liberation is defunding the police. Like he explicitly walked them back and took the steps to do that, not
Yeah.
just
Yeah. And
avoiding talking about it.
and I don't think Democrats or really any, political persuasion should like stray away from apologizing when they feel like they are no longer in step. And
Yeah.
I think I think that is not only, being a big person, but also just for the general health of your election.
Yeah, and voters like when people admit when they fuck up. Like that is a real sentiment amongst voters. Like you
Yeah.
admit that you fucked up and say, I'm gonna do better and I'm gonna move on. Just be clear. Don't be like, well, when I said it, this was happening. No, just go out there and be like, I fucked up, shouldn't have said it. I've changed my beliefs. Kamala Harris did that with a couple of issues. I don't think she would have won, but I think she would have been in a better position instead of deflecting on the fracking issue. Like on the fracking issue, she kept saying, well, that was then. I haven't as vice president, I didn't ban it. What I would have said is, hey, as vice president, I've traveled the country more than I ever have. I've spoken to voters more than I ever have. And I've learned from voters that a lot of their jobs, some of their jobs depend on fracking, their lives depend on it. It's good for the economy. And I've changed my position because of that. I'm not afraid to say that when I'm president, I get better data. I will change my position to make the best decision for the American people. Boom. But then to them, I think to the consultant class and the Democratic establishment, that kind of shows that you're flip
It's
flopping.
seen as capitulating
Yes, and
to
capitulating.
the right wing.
Yes,
And I think that is like part of the issue is this capitulation, I think people view it as swinging right rather than swinging to where people are.
exactly.
And I think that's probably part of the problem.
And
I also
think even
think
oh, go ahead, Dylan.
I
sorry.
also think the sort of dichotomy between private and public policy positions is really interesting because the more open you have the debate, the easier it is to have your private positions be your actual positions. But I also think it could be the inverse as well, where if you establish that like we really want to meet voters where they are, then maybe your policy positions are not where voters are at. So you kind of have
Yeah.
to pretend.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to go about politics either. It's like you are really establishing that voters are where they are. And if you are able to concretely paint that picture, then you should go after that electorally. But in terms
I
of
mean,
your political beliefs, maybe it's not the best to do that.
your private political beliefs or what you think is the best policy does not necessarily have to match up in order for you to have electoral success. I think a really good example of this would probably be Obama. I don't think Obama was homophobic, and I also think Obama probably supported gay marriage before 2008. That's not what he ran on.
Right.
That's not at all what he ran on, and he still goes on to win. I do think that there is probably like a little bit of issue of like, like the authenticity aspect that people keep bringing up. So I think that people kind of want to be spoken to genuinely. And I think that what you're saying is probably right on the merits
And
for that.
also, it's like it's collecting and recruiting candidates that are aligned with that specific area. I mean, we've just ranted about it for the last 10 minutes, but I feel like if you are going to choose somebody, this is the problem with, I mean, just Hillary Clinton seems like the most obvious example, but you get like a conservative running in Southern California, or you get liberal, like a near socialist running in West Virginia. Like, you can pretend all you want that your beliefs are not what you said they were, or you can pretend all you want that you're actually caring about these issues in this specific way. But I think that is where the authenticity part comes in, because if you are, I feel like, and this is the problem with the authenticity thing, is like people can tell when you're not really passionate about the things that you're talking about. I don't think Kamala Harris really cares that much about housing. She seemed pretty like monotone when she was talking about it, but then you
People
It's
can see
not.
hear
through
her talking
bullshit.
about, yeah, exactly, see through the bullshit.
It's as I think there are a certain set of issues that Kamala Harris feels very passionately about. I will say that's not really where 2024 was for her. She
Yeah.
seems pretty passionate about the issue of crime. Oddly enough, when I was reading the 107 Days, she seems really interested by space, which I thought was,
Yes.
I
Yeah,
thought
that
that
was
was,
that was
I thought that
that.
was cool. But
That's cool.
I
They talk
think
about that
crime.
on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, yeah. I thought. Well, anyways, yeah, she seems like super interested in both crime and climate change are probably like the two issues that she, at least from what I've seen of her, seems like pretty passionate about, or it seems interested in discussing. But that's just really not where voters were at or what they wanted to talk about. Her, along with, most Democratic politicians, seemed really uncomfortable talking about the issue of immigration, talking about the issue
Yeah.
of energy, talking about these more like kitchen table, like affordability issues just seemed pretty uncomfortable. And it's not saying that she didn't have it, it was just on the fly. Everyone across the board seemed uncomfortable with it.
And Scotty, do you think that's because the president of the United States is a Democrat, and so if you do talk
Yes,
about those
that's
issues,
that is
people are
that
gonna
is part
blame
of it.
him, or yeah,
That is part of it. I mean, it comes back to the groups trademarked, that kind of instill this fear of, if you have this certain position, we will be calling you a racist. We will be coming to your office. We
yeah,
will be, posting things on social media. We will be sinking your candidacy. And that is a problem.
I do think there is another like driving factor in terms of like how you said candidates were uncomfortable talking about immigration and affordability. I think that's true, but I think there's also like a deeper politic political philosophy thing where, just thinking about the Obama years, he really established multiculturalism as the way forward for the Democratic Party and for America. It was like, we are strengthened by our diversity and by our differences, and Donald Trump is sort of the antithesis of that political
Exactly.
philosophy. I think there was also an uncomfortability with the idea that you are fighting against that multiculturalism by being stronger on the border. I think that really wrestled in some people's minds, where it's like, I am part of this political philosophy that believes diversity is our strength, but then I'm fighting against making America more diverse by being anti-immigrant. I don't know if that's necessarily how it played out. I do think electoral factors are much more powerful, but I also think that must have been in the back of some people's minds.
But I guess, like, why would, at least, my thinking is, like, why would that tension be there if, you have Obama, as you mentioned, talking about diversity being our strength and all that, when he was someone that was really pretty strong on the border. That's
very
something that
strong.
he often talked about. It was, a key policy point as well. It's just like, why does that work for people and it doesn't work now?
Yes, and
Well,
I think
I
I
guess
think
that
strong party leadership, I think, existed under Obama. We had this charismatic party leader, and he could kind of set the agenda from the top and kind of get people on board with something like that and how to frame it while still supporting like a diverse society in general, multiculturalism. Whereas I think under Biden, the leadership was so weak and he's not out there like publicly pushing how to talk about things in a way that like influences Democrats further down the party. And I think like in the absence of that, people kind of Twitter almost becomes that, and that's more prone to people like being more black and white on the issue and not being able to like see the nuance. And I think we can see that, and even in the fact that like Obama in his DNC speeches and when he like gives the rare press appearance, like in the during 2024 or even now, like he does make a very like coherent case on immigration, like kind of threading the needle that we're talking about. So I think it's like you kind of need that person at the top down to set the agenda and the way to talk about the issue, to give permission to Democrats to talk in that way.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, the permission structure I haven't thought about. I think that's a good point because when Obama comes out and speaks, it's like, okay, now this is acceptable. We can say this, but I hate that like mentality. I hate that culture that like we have to wait for someone to say it's acceptable, and then we can start running, politicians in states that have different views than most Democratic politicians do on whatever issues. I kind of hate that, but it's like how parties, I guess, work, and so I kind of like the work that I really
it's
do
how
like the work you
democracy
guys are
works.
doing. Yeah,
It's just how democracy works. People are feeding off other people. That's just, just kind of the way it works.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But Scotty, I just want to before we kind of delve into more about our conversation, just want to touch on Searchlight real quick. Kind of want to talk to you about more of the day-to-day things you guys do, just so our viewers can find out about it and how our viewers can kind of support you guys or read your stuff and keep updated.
Yeah, yeah. We conduct polling pretty often. I think we have polling at least right now, planned out until the end of the year. Right now we have, I believe, 10 fellows right now who work on their own policy proposals that they presented at the very
That's
beginning,
cool.
and I get to help them out with that, which is really awesome. They also have a lot of like cross collaboration with that. We try to promote that they work with one another on different topics. And then, yeah, we also have damage assessments going, which is kind of a reflection on the 2024 election,
I
looking
hope
at
it's better
how
than the DNC's assessment.
we'll see how that goes. I don't think it's been released yet. I think
No,
it's
but there was
close.
some
Okay.
snippets.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that in Politico. I was, yeah.
They are blaming the lack of money early on in the campaign, and
Sure.
Beleh,
Why
you
not?
spend too much time on Twitter. You can't believe
no, it's
everything you
not.
see on there.
No, it was in the Political article. They literally said
Okay,
that the
okay.
It
report
was, it
literally.
was, it was in the article. Hey, that helps. Um, but yeah, we're doing damage assessments, looking at the 2024, how both the groups, politicians, the parties were approaching policy incorrectly, versus where Americans are at. But yeah, I guess supporting us day to day. We have social media going right now. We actively post on X, Threads, and Blue Sky.
Blue sky.
We
Ooh.
Yeah, love Blue Sky. Love
Get
it.
your message out there, please.
Get the message out there.
You
Yeah,
really
no, I
do
mean
need to get your
we
message
are
out there.
posting we are posting. The responses are less than enthusiastic on Blue Sky, but we are posting on X. We are posting on Threads as well.
What about YouTube? What are you guys doing any
Yeah, yeah.
YouTube?
So I think
Right here.
So I think that's like eventually, where we're heading with this. We don't really have any sort of like video content just yet. I think it's the same thing with having, TikTok. We have that, but it's just we don't have the video content just yet to actually post. But yeah, it's supporting us on there, checking out some of our papers. I think right now, housing paper is great. I was an author on it. That was great.
Cool.
But yeah, yeah, it's good stuff.
Scotty,
So yeah.
how did you get involved in politics? What's your story like? I'm sorry, I should have asked you this in the beginning, but
Oh, I I mean, I think the 2016, especially for our generation, was probably like, what kind of like kickstarted that. I eventually end up moving to South Carolina,
oh
where
wow.
there was a lot of discussions about like mass shootings, because this was shortly after the Dylan Roof massacre. And yeah, and I started working with like Indivisible, doing stuff about gun violence. then, South Carolina became a state that was looking at the death penalty, and that kind of animated my politics as well. End up interning for Jamie Harrison as working in policy. And yeah, I think that kind of, kickstarted me off. Doing a little work for the D trip, moving to DC, working at a government relations firm, doing Alaska Native work. And then I am now at Searchlight.
Well, that's cool, man. At least you ended up where you wanted to be, I'm guessing. I think
Yeah,
it's a
no,
great role for you.
it's great. I think it's pretty interesting work that we're doing. I think it's good work, which is always nice to come by in DC.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Scotty, for
Yeah,
coming
thank
on,
you.
talking about Searchlight. Super exciting stuff. We wish you the best of luck. And next time, let's
Awesome,
have you
thank
come
you.
on. Bring anyone else from the company. Love to have
Got
these
it. Got
conversations.
it.
Perfect. Thank you guys, and stay tuned for a lot more episodes.